Hi, this is Tony Ruggiero. Thanks for listening to The Tour Coach. These are the players, coaches, experts, stories, and insights from my work on the PGA Tour at my retreats or my downtown teaching center in Mobile, Alabama. My goal is to shed light and share insights from the people who I've gotten to know and meet working on the PGA Tour and teach it through my career. And I hope this helps all of us play, coach, and teach better golf. If you like what you hear, please give us a good review and take a look at our new Dew Sweepers YouTube channel or the Dew Sweeper on Instagram, where I've taken some time to share videos of help from my teachings, travels, and journeys.
So joining me here on the Tour Coach, one of my favorite interviews. If you don't know, he's been on several times. One of the best, if not the best, teacher out there going on the PGA Tour, one of my good friends, Justin Parsons from over at Sea Island. JP, what are you doing, buddy?
Hey, Tony. Just running through a little storm here this afternoon, so I thought I'd take the chance to get caught up with you and see that you're doing okay.
Yeah, I'm doing good, recovering, getting healed up and ready to get back out there, starting to do a little teaching. So, you know, it's funny, like we get to you and I talked, you get to this time of year, regardless of whether you've got health stuff going on or not. I mean, you're beat to hell by the time you get to this time of year and you're ready for some time off. And been watching your Instagram. I know you've been doing some regular old teaching there at home, so it's got to be nice.
No, it's lovely to get back and sort of reassess. And you know, it's funny. I had a guy in today, and he was saying to me about teaching him. He's maybe a 10 to 12 handicapper. You know, whether I enjoy that and whether we get as much out of it from working with the tour guides. And I honestly believe that if you stop teaching your, let's call them, they're not regular clients, but just everyday golfers, right. I think it de-sharpens your skill set because you really have to know how to communicate, and you can be a little bit more creative with your drills and exercises because you probably need to get more done, and you can see how the body's working, and you can figure a few things out. So it's been really nice to get home. A lot of the boys that had good years this year, all the way up through the playoffs, and I did have just as much fun on the golf course in Vegas as I wanted to. But it is a time of year where there's a lot of kind of tired minds and fairly tired bodies out there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. So you had a great year last year. I think most all of your guys played good. I mean, I'm sure, like all of us, you've always got somebody you feel like you could have helped more, or maybe could have done better, or finished it better, or whatever. But in general, you got to be happy with the year everybody had, and in particular, I mean, the years that Harris English and the job you've done with him is just amazing to me. I've watched Harris from afar, from my time at Frederica, and even before that. It's impressive. So, what do you do at the end of a great year when everybody was pretty damn happy, which isn't always the case?
Well, I think, it's there's very few jobs in the world where you have to play for your living every single year. And I know, someone like Harris, who maybe won a couple of times, he's got that luxury of having 2 years. But, we all know how important momentum is in golf. And, the great year that he's had has been obviously kind of bookended by a Ryder Cup, but that's brought with it, its own little bit of fatigue. He's fighting off a lower back strain that's reoccurred, and we're looking at various avenues to make sure that that's handled in the short to mid term and is being looked after in the longer term. And that's just the attrition of the sport that we're in. I mean, my gut tells me that these guys probably play a little bit more golf mentally than they can handle. I think most of them can handle it physically, but just the attrition of tournament golf on the mind, and the fact that, the golf swing fluctuates and their fields fluctuate and they're in different places all the time. And, as you and I both know, it's probably a lot more glamorous looking into it than it is actually doing it.
I found that, some of my most challenging years were the years after really good years, because to me, expectations go up when a guy has a great year. And then also, by definition, if they've had a great year and they've gone deep in the playoffs, hell, they've probably played 2-3 extra weeks than other people. So They're tired. So the expectations are higher. They're tired. And then, COVID's changed a little bit where maybe they don't have to go as much overseas. But there's these extra tournaments in the fall, and, they're pressured because you feel like you got to play because, FedEx Cup points early, don't want to get behind the 8 ball. And then they're playing a fall season right after they've had a big season that they've played late. Expectations are higher and they're tired. To me, that's a recipe that like is very difficult to coach with. Like to me, that's one of the more challenging things that we experience is everybody thinks when a guy's had a great year, it's just like a coast and a cakewalk. But sometimes those are your more challenging situations.
No doubt. And I mean, it's always interesting you say that. I always try to, think about, when I was dipping my feet into the PGA Tour stuff and looking at, the great success that, Sean Foley was having and, the great success Boyd has. And then all of a sudden they have a couple of years where they're not doing as good. And that doesn't mean that they're not doing a good job. It just means that the cycle of this sport is, it fluctuates an awful lot. And I think, I try and remind myself that every day. You and I have talked about that. And, whilst, you might have a great 2021, you might not just have as good 2022, but that doesn't mean you don't, keep believing in yourself and keep working hard and keep trying to, figure out how to help players get better. And I guess that's the nature of it. And that, cycles back around to teaching the regular golfer. If we can get them to hit the golf ball a little bit better, get them to play a little bit better every time we see them, then I guess we're doing our jobs.
Yeah, I think for me, it's sometimes it's been challenging and difficult to not tie how how good you are as a teacher to how your tour players play, and that's a challenge. Yeah. And you've been a great friend with that, with me, with reminding me that where sometimes it gets difficult, and like you just talked about, one of the more refreshing things is to spend some time with juniors and college players or 10 handicaps or 15 handicappers that are really wanting to get better. It kind of refreshes you a little bit to go to turn around and spend some time with those type of golfers.
No doubt. And you got to keep sharpening your skill set, and you're always learning. It's been nice. I've had the chance. Marnus Moraes, who works with Louis and Xander Schauffele and a bunch of guys, he's given me some back exercises that I've been doing. I've got the chance to go out and hit some balls recently. My back's felt a bit better, and I always think that helps you as well when you're, when we're on the road. It's hard to do that, and then with all the great facilities we have here at Sea Islands, I've been nipping over to retreat, hitting a couple of shots, and working on different grip pressures and different feels with my arms and things that I've been trying to figure out with great success with guys like Colin Morikawa and John Rahm and things that I would probably never teach yet, but trying to figure out how different parts of it work. And I've always used myself as a guinea pig, and it's nice to be able to get back out there and hit some shots. And it doesn't mean that I'm hitting it unbelievable, but it means that you're kind of learning. And if you learn and you figure some stuff out, then you can begin to drip feed it into somebody who needs it. Maybe it could be something that a client can really benefit from in the future. Yeah.
No, I love that. And I mean, I do the same with some of the folks I work with, and I hadn't been able to hit some for the last few weeks, but this time of year is always the time of year where I get a little bit more time to go play a little golf myself and try some things. But more than anything, to me, it helps me like mentally recharge and go back to figuring out why you love helping people, because I think it all started because we love playing,
Yeah, I think you're right. And, you've got to get, I think you've got to, again, manage that idea that, okay, well, Harris English is won twice, so I'm only ever any good whenever Harris English or Louis or whoever else wins golf tournaments. You've got to continue to show up and you've got to continue to work hard, and then ultimately they've got to get out and do their jobs, and hopefully when they do their jobs well, they continue to have that success. But we are only a small part of it, and I suppose we shouldn't really be thinking of our own self-worth by whether they shoot 68 or 73.
Another challenging thing for me, and I want your opinion on this, is, inevitably if you have enough guys playing, you're going to have somebody play good and somebody play shitty in the same week, right? And that's like it's kind of like a tortured feeling, right? You're super happy for the one, but then you're worried about the other. How do you balance that? How have you learned to deal with that?
The worry and the torture is always worse than them playing well is good, if that makes sense. You always focus down. I think you double down on making sure that the person that's not doing well, you want to spend more time, you want to invest more energy, and you want to make sure that they're going to come back up. And I do think, when you flick on that, that PGA Tour app and you get yourself into I get myself in a terrible habit of doing that. You see somebody's, 5 under or 10 under, and then somebody's 4 over. You worry about the 4 over a lot more than you're happy about the 10 under.
Yeah, and I think most people that on the outside looking in, that folks like us would probably think it would be the other way. You'd just be super excited, but I think we always find ourselves worrying more about the guy that's struggling, than the other way around. So now you've had guys play well. So what's an off season like for you, JP? We don't get much, obviously. We got a few more weeks, and then going to wrap up the fall season at your home there at Sea Island. I'm looking forward to coming over for a few days. How do you get guys through this last stretch? It's so tiring to me. This last stretch of golf.
I think, the way that we've, Brian, Harris's back's been playing up a little bit, so I think he certainly had to pull out a CJ Cup. That's, obvious. And so, really he's just been resting and working through. So I've just been, keeping in contact with him and some of the, the medical stroke physical staff. Brian Harman's been, getting his teeth into some golf swing stuff and, sometimes having a little refreshing kind of feel in your golf swing, something that we've worked on a little bit on camera, and that they go, okay, yeah, that looks really good. I'm really excited about how I'm hitting it when I'm doing that. That can give them a bit of sort of refreshing vigor. Louis going to come play RSM. He may play Houston, but he's just trying to, take a little bit of time and get himself, really revamped and ready to go for 2022. And I've recently started with Brandon Grace, another South African player, and Brandon's going to come down and spend a little bit of time at Sea Island, which is great. And I think, that's one thing since moving here. It's, it's so good to get work done when you're away from golf tournaments. It's so good
right.
to be able to do that, that 10 to 15 handicapper experience where you can go in the studio, you can work through a few things, you can be a little bit more elaborate with your illustrations of what you want to get done with the golf swing in a way that you would never do at a golf tournament, because I find myself ever more being, less and less technical at golf tournaments and almost getting away from giving them very much technique stuff to think about at all from a Monday all the way through to when the gun goes off. But it's nice to be at Sea Island. We've got great facilities where we can provide them with those illustrations, show them that that things are getting better and they're going to put the club on the ball better if it performs a certain way, whether that's on gears or whether that's on swing cap or whether that's on video. And I think that can give them a sort of a fresh perspective, because most of them what it's like, Tony. They know what their underlying flaws are, whether they're too far under it or they're too far from too steep or too shallow, whatever. And if they see it lining up and they see it working in a certain way, that they can approach it with a lot more vigor. But I will say that at this time of year, I'm not doing just as many like performance-based drills, short game drills, and I'm not into that real hard yard type of work, because right, the appetite from the players at the moment is really more so of let's get myself down to Mexico, get into a hotel and let's get ready to play golf again. And that's where they are. But for me, it'll be, I'm gonna pretty much, hang a bit. I've got I've been in the United States for almost 3 years now, so my visa stuff's ongoing. I'm doing some work there, and getting myself through some things that are going to allow me to get back on the road in 2022. I'm really looking forward to the RSM Classic. It's going to be a lot of fun. And, I think you and I are going to spend a bit of time up in Pinehurst talking a bit more golf in a couple of weeks, which I'm looking forward to as well.
People are going to get tired of listening to you and I talk at some point.
Yeah, probably already.
Probably already. It seems that with the schedule, it's harder to work away from a tournament. But you and I talked up at, I think it was Liberty National, and we talked some. And I that was the first time that I did any work with Richie Warinsky, who I started working with. And man, I think I told you, I dreaded it because, first time you're going to work with a guy is at a tournament, you can't really do much, know? And it wasn't really until we spent some time in South Florida together and did some work with Colby. And then, we just had a really good day up at his home at Sage Valley up there in Aiken, where we got to really address some things. But I don't think people understand, we don't walk in as tour teachers at an event and necessarily just jump right in and implement something new. Really, I think one of the arts of teaching, and I'd love your opinion on this, is really picking the time of when to introduce new things, because it's not just playing. You've got personal stuff going on. You've got their fatigue. You've got how they're feeling about their game. I mean, there's a multitude of things. It's a real art of figuring out the time when you want to interject the next piece of the puzzle.
Well, I remember, a good few years ago, I think maybe even hearing Claude say to me, that, and perhaps from things that Butch had said, that, sometimes it's a lot more powerful to say nothing than it is to say something. And I think certainly as I get older and hopefully evolve and get better, I think learning to say nothing to somebody, because oftentimes, as when the player hires a new coach, they're thinking, okay, he's going to tell me something about my swing that I've never heard before, and then I'm going to find this game really easy, which again is, that can be part of the pitfall of the players going from coach to coach. They're just looking for that magic bullet that oftentimes really has got, if it ever exists, it's probably by chance, and more often than not, I don't think it does exist. So, to your point, learning to, sell your message in a different way, help them understand that, this is the way I operate whenever I'm working at an event, and this is the way that, we might do things whenever we're away from events. And certainly if it's a player who's, kind of intellectually in tune with the way the game of golf works, then he's someone who can go, yeah, I'm not going to expect Tony to tell me to, move the club differently and my halfway back this week. But, you might have that discussion when you're at Sage Valley, who knows? So I guess it's our job to sort of illustrate that we understand how the game of golf works, and and then when you get the chance to get them away from events, you can get your hands in a little bit more and get what's needed to be done.
I was thinking about this the other day. You and I, we talked about it one other time. We were sitting having a beer, but I was thinking about all the success you're having with your players, and I think you've done I think you got a bunch of guys that live right there by you. And also you got a great place, but you've got a bunch of guys that now where you work and teach, they're there, or they come there to work and spend time away from it. And I think that's a big reason. Obviously, you're a great teacher, but I think that helps get the results. Is that these guys are buying into understanding that you have a plan for them. They know you can make them better, but they know that, hey, to tackle some of these things that they might want to tackle, they got to go with you to Sea Island and work at it. You know what I mean? You can't just throw it out there on the range in Vegas.
There's no doubt that when you look at the list of teachers that Harris had before he had someone, me at Sea Island, he had a list of really, really good people who tried to help him. And without being there, without being on the range and being able to, and put the pieces back in place and not have the distraction of, okay, well, you've got a tea time at 10:30, so we better do this really fast. And, now I know that was confusing, but just go and play and then we'll do something else later on. We didn't have to do that at the start. We could, to your point, calmly go about the process of putting it all back together and having that time together, which is so important. So, no, I would 100% agree. There's no way that I could have, could have had that sort of success without having a home base, like Sea Island and having those people away from golf tournaments. So, that's been a very, very fortunate part of this little journey, and hopefully we can continue to track on into another year.
The one thing I want to talk about as well is, these are all things I think we've talked about too, is as I've gotten older, I've realized also that you can't help everybody. And it's important to find somebody that's actually going to buy in to what it is that I'm saying or you're saying, our plan. If they're not, then the plan and the relationship's probably not going to work anyways, right?
Yeah.
And I think coming up and even until recently, I don't know that I was very good at that. I think I was just eager to try to have another tour player.
Yeah.
But I've done more, try to be more introspective and think about more things, and I've bounced a bunch of it off of you. I think finding the right match and somebody that's going to buy in is equally as important sometimes as the information we give.
Well, I agree. I think there's a couple of little segues from there. I think that the better you can get at being able to reach people. I put an Instagram thing up a while ago about Jack Lumpkin, and Jack and I were sitting talking. Jack's still he's still very much involved in Brian's work, and I obviously oversee stuff on the road, and then Jack and I share a lot of the responsibilities when we're on the island. And Jack said to me, you've got to make sure that you know how to change the message to reach more people, because if you can't change your message, in other words, articulate it in a different way, tell a different story, put it in a different way, you're not going to reach as many people. So I think part of the art in it is being able to tell the story in the way that the person in front of you is going to associate with and understand and enjoy. But to your point, I think if there's a disconnect there, or if they're not really buying in, I think you're probably better off cutting it off quickly and moving on quickly. And I think you and I know when it feels like that. When it feels like it needs to move in a different direction. It's a little bit like back in the day when you were 16 and the girl didn't have any interest in you anymore. You'd be better off just walking away than continuing to annoy her.
Yeah. You're telling that to a guy who's been married 4 times. So I've obviously mastered that part a little bit. I've probably done better with that than the teaching part, JB. So you talk about getting better at getting your message to more people. As you look at 2022 coming up, I mean, you're at the very top of your game, no question. How do you keep getting better? Like, what do you, like, if you are honest with yourself, I don't mean to get personal here, but like, and you look at your team, like, what do you say to yourself? Like, hey, I got to get better at this next year, like, to do better. Like, I mean, I think all of us that do this ask ourselves that. Like, what do you have to get better at?
I oftentimes think that the things that are the simple day-to-day things are the things you need to get better at in order for the whole process to get better. So, I made a pact with myself, which I've been reasonably good at, to make sure that I send them a note as to what my plan is each time that I see them. So either we've had a conversation the night before or the day before, or I'm going to get a text message. They're going to say, look, this 2 hours that we're going to spend, or 3 hours or 90 minutes tomorrow is going to look like this. We're going to do this, 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 and this. So the process is planned. And it was funny, Harris kindly, took myself and Eric Larson, his caddy, to the Georgia football training. And obviously I'm trying to get my head around, NFL, American football, college football. And we went to the facility. I'm doing okay. I'm almost a dog. I mean, I'm trying to understand it. I kind of like the Falcons. I've met Matt Ryan. He's a fantastic guy who's he's doing a great job. But anyway, we went to the training facility, which blew my mind, and we saw these incredible young athletes who were so well organized. And I looked at the coaching staff, and I just thought to myself, not only did the recovery stuff and some of the physical training stuff, and but it also struck me how well organized the whole thing needed to be in order for it even to tick at all. They sit and they have briefings from 2:30 to 4:30, and then they have practice from 4:30 to 6:30. And I kind of figured, a lot of times for me, my own personal side, sometimes the guy just turns up on the range, and I kind of walk out and I go, hey, how's it going? And we put her around, and there's no real pre-plan in that. And I feel like that's one of the things that I really want to make sure I get better at, is knowing where we are within the journey, knowing where we are within the story, and trying to make sure the player, understands where we are and what we're going to be doing. Because I think that planning of the process, I think will ultimately make the process more efficient. So, I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't want to, learn more about the way the pressures are being applied to the handle of the club and how the body's working. And I've been, interested in a lot more neck tilts and some visual stuff lately. But, overall, I think, sometimes it's the planning, it's the, making sure everything's timely, making sure you're on time. All of the little things, I think, probably add up to the bigger picture.
Yeah, fascinating. That's great advice. No, I love that stuff. And, I can't disagree with any of it. I think that, for me, I've tried to, I think at times, like, I take players for granted and that they're doing okay, and then maybe sometimes shift too much attention to another guy that's struggling, and then before you check back on the other guy, maybe they're not in a good place and it's hurt your relationship. For me, it's not taking any player for granted, right? And, and with that being said, so there's then obviously a limit to like our time and our energy and our abilities. For you, and I mean, this is a touchy, but like Is there a limit? Because I know before I've watched guys out there that maybe have 10 guys, and I'm like, how the hell? I mean, shit, there's no way I could do that, right? Because I'm very personable and like to be with the guys. Like, is there a limit to how many folks you can help at one time, or do you feel like you get less of that? I mean, how does that work for you?
You know, I've basically said that I can have 5 players are full-time players who have an ongoing responsibility to them at home, at the golf school, and on the road. And from that sort of 5, those are my 5 guys that I'm going to continue to put all of my energy into, conscious energy when I'm, traveling, when I'm not traveling, etc. So that, you really are on the journey with them. And, obviously with some of the success comes interest, and I've tried to figure out a way then to, see guys whenever I'm at the Golf Performance Center, and I'll make sure that my job there is to try and help, give them my absolute best efforts. If they book me for half a day or a day, I'm trying to help them in every way that I can. But that help remains at the Golf Performance Center and isn't extended to, me looking at video and answering questions and being on the road, because the 5 guys who've invested in me and who have, shown in many cases great loyalty and great trust in me, I think if there were many more than that, I think it would be really difficult to do a good job. Now, obviously, if you get a fine player that, you've helped, and I've helped a little bit, Bill Haas. I mean, Bill's come in and he's had a couple of golf lessons he's had 3 hours with me at the Performance Center. I saw him in Vegas. We had a nice chat, but I didn't want to stand and watch him hit balls, and he understands that. So, that's part of the process, and I guess when you get better at something, you kind of need to learn to say no, and you need to make sure that you continue to display loyalty to people who've been loyal to and looked after you, and it's a tricky part of it, because it can go sideways very quickly. If all of a sudden I had 8 guys out there, and Harris needed to be somewhere, and Louis needed to be somewhere else, and then all of a sudden I've got 2 new people. They just think that you don't really care about them, and that's what we need to avoid.
Yeah, and again, that's my challenge. I'm trying to get better at that, and I always like picking your brain about that stuff. Justin, this was one that's great, always catching up with you. Looking forward to doing that thing at Pinehurst with you. We'll dazzle them, I'm sure. I'm just going to introduce you and sit back and let you talk. But anyways, congrats on a hell of a year. I know you're going to keep it going. And also thanks for all your support and friendship over the last year. You know how much I appreciate it. Look forward to hanging out and having a beer soon.
You're a good man, Tony. Thanks a lot. Safe driving, and we'll chat again soon.
That's Justin Parsons. I'm Tony Ruggiero. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Tour Coach. I want to take a minute and thank Cordy Walker and Golf Science Lab, as well as my sponsors Shrixon, Buick, Bushnell, and Vineyard Vines for helping make all of this possible and helping me share my insights with you. If you like what you've heard, why don't you check out more on the Dew Sweepers channel on YouTube, as well as the Dew Sweeper on Instagram, or go to dewsweepersgolf.com to find out more about my teaching, my travels, and where you can find out more about me.